Let's talk about
politics, environmental science,
global warming,
constitutional rights,
social and economic challenges,
money, power, choice.
Nature does not compromise.
Extreme droughts, extreme heat waves.
Sea levels are rising, and it is about climate change.
This is the future of the next generations.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk About Climate, a podcast where we talk about climate change and how it relates to all of us. Join us, Change the Chamber Fellows, as we talk with scientists, grassroots campaigners, politicians, and more as we open up the conversation on climate. I'm your host, Yesenia Chavez, and we are joined today by our special guest, Danielle from EcoMadres, on this special episode for Hispanic Heritage Month. And this is Let's Talk About Climate.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Yesenia, for the introduction and for hosting this conversation today. I'm Danielle, and I'm the National Field Events Coordinator for Moms Clean Air Force, and we're a community of over 1.5 million parents and caregivers united to protect the health of children and young people against the impacts of climate change and air pollution. And I work within our Latino community engagement program called EcoMadres as well, which is why I'm here today.
Beautiful. Yeah, we're so excited to have you. Thanks again for being here. I also just wanted to introduce myself because it's my first podcast for Change the Chamber, but I have been a climate fellow since June 2022, and I'm also the lead for the research team, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, this is very exciting for us to be hosting EcoMadres. We're really glad to have you here. So yeah, I can give you a second to just introduce yourself a little bit further and your background. We can talk a little bit about Hispanic Heritage Month and how that relates to you.
All right, sounds good. So a little background. I was born in Miami, Florida. My father's family is Cuban, and my parents raised me and my 4 siblings up until I was 14 years old in Costa Rica. And in my earliest years living there, I lived in a very under-resourced coastal community, and we experienced a dengue epidemic, a terrible earthquake, mudslides, and my town was not prepared in terms of infrastructure and resources to be able to overcome those situations. And so later on, in my later years in Costa Rica, I started getting involved in environmental work. I ended up co-founding an environmental NGO to engage youth in science and conservation work, because we believe that the people that are bearing the brunt of environmental degradation should be involved in decision-making processes for their communities. So that's, those experiences also showed me that living and working within frontline communities, that these are the first guardians and first protectors of their ecosystems. They are also the people who depend the heaviest on the health of their natural resources and environment, and for their survival and their livelihood. So all these experiences in my childhood, along with, my studies, my research, and other field work in and outside of school, I just graduated a year ago from Cornell University, gave me the sensitivities and the motivation and perspectives that I bring to my work with Moms Clean Air Force and EcoMadres, especially working in Latino communities who are defending their right to clean air and a safe environment. And it's important to talk about, going back to Hispanic Heritage Month, to highlight not only, all the amazing diversity and culture and contributions of Latino communities in the US, but take this time and beyond Hispanic Heritage Month year long to talk about the injustices that they face and what we can do together to overcome them. So hopefully that wasn't too long, but that's just a little bit of my background.
Yeah, I completely agree too. I mean, just the fact that these communities also know their environment the best. They know what it needs, like what makes sense, and they're just so much more in tune with everything that has to do with their environment. I mean, they live there. And like you said, they require those, the nature around them to survive. A lot of the time it's, part of their culture too. So
yeah.
I love that work, the work that you do. I think, everything that you mentioned is super important. And I'm glad that you bring up, that it's important to bring up these topics this month, but also all year round, because, we'll be going into it, but Hispanics are disproportionately affected by climate change and a lot of environmental issues that are ongoing right now. So I'm glad that we're bringing it to light in this conversation as well. Especially when, Hispanic Heritage Month is meant to recognize the contributions and the influence that Hispanic Americans have, in the history and the culture and the achievements of the US, because we make up a large part of the country, and even outside of the US, of course, the global south of, South America and all of these countries that are so important, have such beautiful environments and natural resources. Yeah. So I guess
Totally.
personally, for Hispanic Heritage Month, my connection is that my family is from Chihuahua, Mexico. So I was born in the US, but we would go back and visit family like every single summer growing up. Have, so many cousins and aunts and uncles down there. So it was always beautiful to go back and visit and to feel the family and the culture and all the amazing food, of course. But it's been like 7 or 8 years since I've gone back, and it's so crazy to think about, just like not going back to see your family and where you're from, where your family's from.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it does speak to a lot of experiences, Latinos in the US. And I know that you also within the US, you've had your own experiences probably with some of these topics. And I really appreciate the perspective that you're bringing. And I'm sure it is very hard that you haven't been able to go back in all this time. So hopefully you have family nearby that,
Yeah, definitely. It's important to have your family and your community, and just, having that like love, that communal love. But I love it. Okay, I'm excited. So we can jump into the first question if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So there's going to be a little bit on intersection of environmental and social justice. So how have you seen environmental issues disproportionately affecting Hispanic communities? And, if you have any specific examples from your work.
Yeah, so again, I work with EcoMadres, and our lens is an environmental justice lens. And what that means is, as we probably know, marginalized communities in the US, particularly people of color, low-income communities, are disproportionately impacted by the health effects of air pollution and the compounding effects of climate change. So that's what EcoMadres works on. And while everyone is affected by these issues, everyone in the US, everyone worldwide is affected because climate and air knows no boundaries. It's the people that contribute the least to the problem that are unjustly overburdened by it. And I think the motto of EcoMadres speaks to this very well. Our motto is justice in every breath. And what that means is what could be a more fundamental human right than the air that we breathe? And everybody deserves to breathe clean and safe air. So that's what we're fighting for. I mean, bringing it back to the US, and the Latino community, 68% of Latinos here live in communities that don't meet federal air quality standards. That means that they're breathing unhealthy air. Latino children are 60% more at risk than white children of having asthma attacks caused by air pollution that often comes from proximity and exposure to industrial sources such as oil and gas. In fact, in the US, almost 2 million Latinos live near oil and gas facilities, which is a problem in and of itself, but it only adds to the existing pollution and inequality problems that a lot of these communities face.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can attest to that. I am living in Weld County, Colorado, which is the state's leading producer of oil and gas. It's also the major producer for dairy, meat, and several crops for the state. It produces like $2 billion in yearly sales. So along with like the fact that there are so many oil and gas platforms in the county, it's like interspersed with these farms and these, like, just so much of a like crazy, a drastic difference, I feel like, from, 10 years ago. And yeah, I just really saw the difference. Like starting college, I'd like come back and there were like 10 new platforms. And I was like, what the heck? Like, how can there be so many coming up around schools, around neighborhoods? And yeah, I just did like, while I was in my master's, I was doing a lot of research on, what is happening, what has happened over the last like 20 years. And it's just so discouraging to see that there's also not enough of a halt, that there's like still a lot of people wanting more oil and gas platforms and more of just, fossil fuels to be used. And it's like, if we don't know already what fossil fuels are doing, like, why would we be making those decisions? It's upsetting for sure, especially, there are a lot of Latinos in the area. There are like 20 to 30% of the population, and I mean, a majority of them are from Mexico. I think it's hard to find people that are from other Latin American countries, but a lot of these people are working on the farms. They're working in livestock farms too, and they were the ones that were like front line during COVID. Also, I don't know if you remember any stories of these like meat packing plants. There's one in Greeley, the JBS plant, and there were people that were dying because they didn't have PPE equipment and they didn't have, any sort of attention to them when they are like the backbone of this industry. And
Yeah.
that's just so crazy to me to even have
Yeah,
seen,
mhm.
the difference that COVID made and them to still not do anything about it.
Yeah, it's a very hard pill to swallow that this can even be that this can even happen, and there are so many entities protecting industries. And that's why it's so important to elevate stories like the one, like your story and what you just shared, because ultimately there are all these statistics, all these numbers, but there are people behind that, and there are people suffering the real life consequences of these emissions and of climate change. And so it is so important to talk about. That's, so central to our work as well, as is really amplifying that message. But we actually, EcoMadres is a community-based organizer-based organization, and one of our EcoMadres organizers is also in Colorado. Her name is Shayna, and she's a member of the Navajo Nation, and she fights tirelessly for stronger protections for Indigenous and Latino communities against oil and gas pollution. And unfortunately, she is also living in proximity to this pollution, because as we know, the history and ongoing reality of systemic racism, where certain families and certain communities are forced to live, to work, and to play in areas that with higher exposure to these toxins. And something that Shayna talks a lot about, and you hear her say, is that essentially these are, sacrifice zones, because it's not only the air, like it's not just the pollution that you described, the oil facility near your home. It's not just polluting the air, it's seeping into the soil, affecting food that we eat, affecting the water that we drink. And so it is really important to talk about that, and also to link, what that means in terms of public health, because air pollution manifests itself in many health issues in varying degrees, from asthma to pulmonary diseases, neurological and cardiovascular diseases, but it's affecting vulnerable populations within those communities the most, right? So we work with, our focus is infants and children who are developing and are more susceptible to the health impacts of air pollution exposure, pregnant people, immunocompromised people. You mentioned COVID, and it's just all these compounding effects make it so much harder to recuperate from one thing, and it made it so much harder to recuperate from COVID, and it makes it so much harder to recuperate from any kind of environmental disaster that happens. And so we have to, it's important to talk about it. It's not just climate change, it's not just air pollution, it's all these things together. And yeah, it's just, it's hard to talk about this And especially if you are in an impacted community, it can be traumatizing. But there are, which I know we'll talk about further down in the conversation, there are so many organizations and initiatives and existing projects that people can join to take action and to channel that frustration and that anxiety into action, and to not just that, to also find community within that climate and environmental space and form social and emotional connections with people around these issues and cope that way. So
Yeah,
yeah.
having support is so important. I think especially when you see, how much the climate crisis is affecting our communities, it's even more important now to have that support. And it's going to be even more important in the future when there's, even crazier extreme weather. And yeah, I think that's so true, because even when I started doing some environmental work and kind of realizing how like screwed we were and just how bad things were, I guess, there's a lot of anxiety with it. And if you're in a community that doesn't get listened to, doesn't have that like spotlight, because even here they made like a whole commission, an oil and gas commission for Weld County, but there aren't any like Spanish speaking people on the panel or on the board. There aren't any like, easier access ways to talk to the board or to submit comments, stuff like that in Spanish. Like there's no communication in Spanish. Like there's just no effort to include that part of our community, which is so wrong because they make up such a big part of it. Like they deserve to be a part of the decision making. And yeah, so I think having those connections and making those support systems also helps in like making a bigger difference in like, standing up against, whoever's in the way. It needs to be done.
Yeah, it does. And that, I mean, it's so important to find avenues to, this is a collective movement, and it's important for people within these communities, in the Latino community, to empower one another to take action. And unfortunately the reality is that historically Hispanic and Latino people have been excluded from decision-making processes, and ultimately these decisions and these boards that you're talking about, anything that comes out of that is going to affect Latino communities, low-income communities, marginalized communities the most. And you did mention, with the rising threat of climate change, and Latino communities are experiencing the real health effects of climate instability every single day, both physically and mentally. They're experiencing the impact on livelihoods, like you mentioned, disrupting schooling for children, and in so many, it shows up in so many other ways. And on the topic of climate change, because you asked for examples, extreme weather, extreme heat is something we think of often, and that's only going to become more intense and more frequent. And in the US, this obviously has a disproportionate impact on outdoor workers, which are predominantly Latino. And whether it's farm workers, construction workers, first responders, utility workers, it's the outdoor workforce that's at higher risk of premature death due to exposure to heat. And beyond that, more than half of Latinos are already living in 3 of the states that are facing some of the most serious effects of climate change, whether that be heat in Texas, drought in California, or flooding and sea level rise in California, and sea level rise and flooding in Florida. And so this is only going to become worse and worse. And it's also not a future problem. It's already happening. And so it's important for EcoMadres to, we really try to create, we work directly with communities, and we try to really develop relationships and trust, and find ways to bring educational resources to communities, not only in, translated fact sheets, which we have plenty of. EcoMadres has plenty of fact sheets, but also through continuous engagements and conversations about what's going on in people's backyards, how that's linked to their health, and what people can do about it. Like there are many ways that people can get involved and raise their voices to advocate for more equitable solutions. So
Yeah. No, that's so important. I feel like a huge part of, what our community needs, our Latino community, is education on some of these issues, because some people don't really know what's going on, what it means to have an oil or gas plant like right next to you. What is it actually going to do? And a lot of the time, like, my parents don't really know how to use a computer. They're not really going to go up and search like, oh, what does it mean to have these platforms nearby, or like, looking up asthma rates and stuff. So I think just explaining that stuff to Latinos is also super important. That way they, have that ability to do something about it if they want. But yeah, just having that knowledge of your environment is so important. And I think that's a big thing that we need to work on for sure. Just getting more of that information out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's, I mean, I guess going into a little bit more of EcoMadres work, that's kind of one side of it, is the education and equipping communities with resources that are accessible, not only in language, but culturally relevant. They're digestible, and it really drives a message home as to what this link is between climate, air pollution, and health. And this allows communities to take measures to protect themselves, right? And to take advantage of opportunities to do so. So for instance, whether it's through one-on-one conversations at farmers markets and Latino communities that we do, or through hosting informational webinars with public health experts, it's important to get the word out there. Something that we've worked a lot on is trying to get school districts with high Latino populations to apply for electric school buses. There are grants because of Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, his big piece of legislation, and historic climate investments that will award school districts electric school buses. And it's important to get the word out about that, to offer resources to help throughout that process so that kids can ride a clean bus to school. And not just the kids, but bus drivers. We work very closely with a bus driver. Her name is Carmen, and she lives here in Maryland. And she is a huge advocate because it's not just the children, it affects the entire community to, make that shift from breathing diesel emissions to clean rides. And at the end of the day, we don't want anyone to be left behind as we're transitioning to a more just, sustainable, hopefully, way of operating, that everyone is a part of that.
Yeah. No, that's so important. And having those grants, those opportunities for these communities to keep up, because a lot of the time, like, this is just so expensive. There's no like other possibility for them to move into this cleaner energy technology. And of course we want everyone to. So I'm glad that there's actually an opportunity for them to maybe get them. I mean, I don't know how like sure it is, but yeah, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's the reality is that the lower income communities sometimes don't even have the luxury to put all their resources into, let's figure out how to apply. Let's figure out this process and take it apart. So it's important to, for EcoMadres to make ourselves available and to do the work in spreading the word and helping along these processes, because at the end of the day, it's complicated, and sometimes it's not very accessible. So we're trying to bridge that gap. And, the other side of our work beyond education and, these resources is we really want to create opportunities for frontline stories and human experiences to impact decision-making. And we talked about this a little bit, but I can give some examples of what we do. So we, EcoMadres and Moms Clean Air Force, we have relationships with lawmakers and staffers. So we try to get community members into the room and meeting with these people who are ultimately going to make decisions and trying to amplify policies that are going to center impacted communities and are going to center Latino communities. And you did mention EPA work. We, during the public comment period. So the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, they'll, as you know, they have periods where after a proposed regulation, they open it up to the public to participate. And so we want to make this accessible, and we want to empower Latinos to participate. So actually, just a few months ago, I co-hosted with a fellow EcoMadre a workshop on, talking people through what it looks like to write testimony and making ourselves available to answer questions in a process that can be very intimidating, especially if it's your first time. It's intimidating to me as well. I've testified many times, and I've in the past year of being here, and it's, it's a little intimidating. And so it's nice to have a community that you can talk this out with, and you can empower one another to raise your voice, right?
Right. It's another support system. And actually that goes into our second question, which I can ask really quick and we can keep talking about it, but it was just asking about some recent success stories or strategies employed by EcoMadres to empower Hispanic communities in advocating for environmental justice. And I mean, testimonies are huge. I've also done them for Change the Chamber, and my first one was a little intimidating, but the few after have been amazing, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify every time. But having people from our community have their voices heard and have their stories heard is so important, so beautiful to have, that information out there for people to actually hear it. So that's really great that you guys have these workshops to help people, because you might not feel as comfortable writing it by yourself, and so having someone kind of walk you through it and show even an example, I mean, that just makes such a big difference, and it gets way more people to testify, and
it's that space. It's important to have that space where you also feel comfortable. That's completely true. But I guess I can give you some more examples. Like we, beyond the testimonies and meetings with lawmakers and those one-on-one conversations with communities, we also provide speaking opportunities for community members. So actually one of our organizers, our state organizers, her name is Erandi. She's an EcoMadre organizer in Texas. And she comes from a multi-generational home where her Erandi, her mother, her niece, all suffer very serious health issues due to living in proximity to industrial facilities, as well as busy truck routes. So she not only testified recently for the clean truck standards from the EPA, but she was also a speaker alongside the EPA administrator when the clean truck standards were finalized and announced in a press event. So this just having that platform is so important. And I think, if we're talking about success stories, it's an ongoing fight. So and there's always more work to do, but it is seeing these moments where people are also paying attention and listening to the stories, because that's what matters. I think that's what it comes down to, right? Is that storytelling aspect. Something else that EcoMadres is very proud of is our EcoMusica program. And EcoMusica, well, we're very lucky to have a state organizer in Iowa. Her name is Karin, she's originally from Costa Rica and Colombia, but she is a very talented singer and songwriter. And she runs the EcoMusica initiative, where she writes and sings songs related to climate issues, how they pertain to Latino communities in particular, but it's also inspiring, and it also is hopeful, right? And so this is, and in the US with such a immense diversity within the Latino community, whether it be linguistically, whether it be culturally, there are so many nationalities represented in the US, but music is something that can really bring people together and create that sense of community and social and emotional connection that we talked about is so important. And probably the first step in anything, and any kind of call to action or anything, it's having that community and feeling that support system. Yeah, that's so true. And that's so beautiful that you have this specific, way for people to connect, because I think it's so
I don't know, growing up Hispanic, like music is such a big part of us, of our culture, sorry, of our culture, of our families, like spending time with families, having, parties with families. Like music has just always been a huge part. And I think having that as like a way for people to connect within EcoMadres is really special. And yeah, it's a very like unique way of doing things, because I don't think I've heard of too many other groups doing anything like this. And yeah, I think it can also be like so special for the people that do connect with it in that way, because reading an article or even listening to a podcast might not, get you in your feels, but I feel like music definitely does that for me.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that can connect people no matter, what your nationality is, no matter what. It's also just, we're talking about how depressing and disheartening it can be to be involved in the space or even learn about it for the first time. But there are ways to get involved, and there are ways to do it in a way that's kind of like enriching to you too. And it's like, and I think music is so important to not only drive the message home of, what's going on, why should we care, but that there is a community out there that's going to support you, and that, that there are ways to do it that are inspiring, and not necessarily, like, it's like maybe a relief from the reality, the reality and these statistics that we're hearing about all the time, right?
Yeah, because it can be quite jarring to hear, like you said, some of these realities, and I think numbers can also just feel so like cold and harsh. But yeah, I mean, music, I mean, you mentioned this is all kind of storytelling, but music does it in such a like, special way. But
creative too. Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, that's so special that you have someone, that can create that space.
Yeah. We actually, for Hispanic Heritage Month, we did a little video, and Karin, the Ecomusica person, she has a daughter who wrote a poem, and all the Ecomadres read the poem, and the Ecomusica songs were in the background, and it was honestly really beautiful. So maybe we can share that after this conversation.
Yeah, that's so sweet. Aw. And that's so true. Like I didn't even think about that. It's also, you're also able to have a conversation with people that are younger, people that, maybe
cross-generational, totally.
Yeah. And people that don't like read the news or anything like that. I don't know. I just feel like there's so much more availability in reaching audiences and reaching people that you might not on other platforms.
Right.
That's awesome. So are there any like specific storytelling in like any of these areas, opportunities that you like really enjoyed? Any specific one that, was really a pleasure for you to work on?
I think for me, everything, what I love also about working with EcoMadres is that there are so many different ways to get involved, and that's going back to accessibility, like whether there's an organizer in your state, whether you can make it, there's an organizer in state, but you can't get to an event. There's so many opportunities to do stuff virtually, or to even listen to music. And so that's what I love about the work of EcoMadres, is that there are so many ways to get involved, and everything goes back to storytelling. Something I did enjoy a lot is, a few months ago, we hosted a cafecito. So it was a virtual conversation with Latina leaders in the climate and environmental justice space. And it was in honor of Mother's Day, but it was really trying, shedding light on why Latina communities should care, but also all the work that people are doing, and also like the role of Latina women in carrying this forward. And I really enjoyed that, because it was just so insightful. And again, it's nice to, in all of these projects and events, that yes, there's the reality, but you're always, you leave feeling very motivated and empowered. So I think maybe I'll point to that. And also cafecitos, another great way to bring community together in conversation, another outlet, emotional outlet. But yeah, I'll maybe point to that. But yeah, does that answer?
Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, it also just, like you mentioned, sounds like there's always things going on and always like great projects. I mean, all of the work that you've mentioned is amazing. So I'm sure it can be really hard to like pick one that's your favorite too.
Yeah. I mean, today for another Hispanic Heritage Month launch, but this again happens year long. EcoMadres is working on this, engaging in these topics every single day. We're launching a series it's called EcoCharla with EcoMadres. EcoCharla is just a chat. It means a chat. And we're starting our series with elected officials, and we just had our first one today. So hopefully this will be a monthly thing, and it's really cool to get, that one-on-one conversation with an elected official who is, they are making decisions, and they're close to where policies are created. So kind of bridging that and minimizing the space between local community and decision making is so important. Because not only is pollution not caused by Latino communities, but it affects Latino communities more. But solutions are also historically not made by Latino communities, and they do have a huge impact on these communities. So I think that's just something that is very central to our work, and many other organizations as well that are working in this space.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I completely agree. I think getting perspective from people that are government officials that are in those offices, having the conversations to make changes on any rules or policy or regulations, they really need to be hearing these storytellings, these, ideas from people that are living in the communities and the opinions of them too.
Yeah.
So that's really great that you're able to have those conversations and in a public space too, and to share that information. But yeah, having their perspective is important because it's not easy to get a lot of these things done. It's not that difficult either. It can be done, but yeah, I think once you're in that tough spot, it's a bit different, I would say, but yeah, I don't know. Cool. Well, I think, we've gone through these questions, and I love, our conversation. I wish we could go on forever.
We probably could.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. But yeah, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and having this lively discussion with me. Yeah, we really, like I said, we appreciate the work that EcoMadres does and that you specifically do as well. Each one of you on this team is so important. And yeah, so thank you to Danielle for being here, and thank you to our listeners for listening to this episode of Let's Talk About Climate. Before you go, don't forget to like us, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars on your podcast platform. It really helps us out. Follow us on Instagram as well at Let's Talk About Climate Pod, and Twitter at Talk Climate Pod. And check out our website, changethechamber.org. You can find all the links in the description. And we also have a call to action from Danielle. She's going to talk a little bit about these petition links that we're also going to include in the description at the bottom.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting this conversation. And I think, it probably would be easiest to just link things, I guess, in the description, but you can also follow EcoMadres on Instagram and Twitter at EcoMadres_ and EcoMadres USA on Facebook. And you can visit Moms Clean Air Force at momscleanairforce.org, and EcoMadres is under one of the programs tab. And yes, we do have petitions linked on our website, and there are many, they cover many different issues. Feel free to sign them all. It's all, it's all for the health of children, of young people, of marginalized communities at the end of the day. I will say one of them is we're urging President Biden and EPA Administrator Regan to finalize the strongest pollution standards as soon as possible. So that might be the first one you see on there. But yeah.
Absolutely. That one sounds very important. They're all important, but I think for our podcast today, I think that would be ideal.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. We'll make sure to include those, but thank you again, and I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks for hosting this.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.